Hello, my name is Rob Whitacre, and I'm going to be your teacher during this study titled Believe the Bible, the Affirmation of God. Now, the purpose of this study is to examine the evidence as to why we believe God exists. Now, we're not going to make this study about something better felt than told or an emotional appeal. See, belief in a higher being should be the product of sound reasoning. We would ask for you to have an open mind, apply your reasoning abilities to some very simple questions, draw some logical conclusions. Although you will find a few Bible verses, they're only used to state some common sense principles. They do not require a belief in God. So let's go ahead and start. Who or what was in the beginning? Do you believe the material world had a beginning? Well, the obvious answer is yes. The very fact that we date the world tells us that we believe, all over the world, that there was a beginning. So, since the answer is yes, the next question is, do you believe the material world created itself from nothing? Now, you have observed the material world. You've looked at the continents. You've looked at land and houses and buildings. Have you ever seen anything create itself from nothing? So the obvious answer is no. Do you believe it is possible that there was an energy in the beginning? Now, this energy cannot be created or destroyed. That could have been responsible for creating the world. Now, notice, I said possible. I'm not requiring at this point in our study that you believe it, you affirm it. I'm just asking, do you believe that's a possibility? Are you open-minded? Well, obviously that answer would be yes. So therefore, the next question is, would you be open to the possibility that this energy could be called God? Now, in the Bible, that energy is given a name. It's in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So we're just looking at the possibility that that could be true. Now, with that being said, it's time to go to the next section of our study. A building requires a building. So does every house have a builder? Now, you have observed houses. You probably live in an apartment or house. Would you conclude that there must have been a builder for the house? And the answer is obvious. It's yes. Isn't it impossible for a house to build itself? Have you ever seen a house built itself? It would be nice if a house would build itself, quicker, cheaper, but we both know that does not happen. So it is, yes, impossible for a house to build itself. Wouldn't it be equally absurd to suggest an infant could build a house? Now, if you have an infant, you have the possibility of a builder. But the problem is that an infant does not have the capability to build a house. So the reason why it would be absurd is because the person building the house has to have the power to build the house. And so it would not be logical to look at an infant who does not have the ability even maybe to walk or talk to build a house. Look at our next question. Can a house appear from nothing? Well, I'm sure you have never observed this happening. I've never seen it happen. So the answer is no. We have not seen a house appear from nothing. The next question is it possible that a house has always existed? In other words, could a house be eternal? It's always existed. Well, I assume that in the house you live or the apartment complex, somewhere there's a deed with a date on it, or maybe you have a brick somewhere on the house that has a date written on it when it was built. Again, when you date something, that does imply there was a beginning. So we know houses have not always existed. So the answer would be no. Next, must the builder of the house be greater in ability and power than the house? Well, this goes back to the infant, the question we observed previously. So the answer would be yes. Whoever built the house has to have a greater power or ability in order for the product to be finished. The next question says, if a house requires a builder, is it possible that the universe would require a builder? Now, if we can see and understand the fact that a house must have a builder, when you look at the universe, can we not also assume the very same principle? Did you realize that the Bible actually states this? In Hebrews chapter 3 in verse 4, the writer says, "For every house is built by someone, but he that builds all things is God." Now let's look at our next section together. Every effect must have a sufficient cause. Is the existence of the universe greater than the existence of a house? Well, surely you would say yes. When we examine the solar system and the many systems that make up our universe, the sun and the planets, the stars, we all know that that is greater than a house. So let's look at the next question. Do you believe that it would be impossible for the universe to create itself? Well, I've never seen anything create itself. We've established the fact that a house does not appear out of nothing. The answer would be yes. Wouldn't it be impossible for the universe to have come from nothing? Well, the principle of nothing produces nothing makes this answer very simple. It's yes. Look at the next question. Wouldn't it be equally impossible for a man to have created the universe? Now, remember back to our question about an infant creating a house, and we made the point that an infant doesn't have the ability, the capability to create a house. So you would never believe that an infant created a house. But look at the universe. Wouldn't it be impossible to say that a man could create the universe? Do you have the power to create the universe? I know I certainly don't. And so the answer is obviously yes. Must the builder of the universe come from outside the universe itself? Let's examine this question very briefly. Since the universe can't create the universe, then we would say that something outside of the universe had to create it. With that being said, must the builder of the universe be greater in ability and power than the universe? Well, going back to our previous questions, we know that an infant couldn't build a house. We know that a man couldn't build the universe. So we know that the universe has to have a creator with greater ability and power than just a simple man or woman. So the answer is yes. Now, must that builder of the universe be older than the universe? So we're asking, does the builder have to predate the universe? Well, obviously, yes. I mean, the builder of a house would have to be older than the house. And these are conclusions that are demanded by evidence, sound reasoning. Now, with these facts being established, look at the next one. Does the fact that we apply a date to the universe imply it had a beginning and therefore has not always existed? The year 2020 applies or implies that the universe can be dated. We take the date back. There's a reason we do that, because most people of sound reasoning, they acknowledge the fact that the universe had to have a beginning. If it's not possible for material things like matter, I mean tables, chairs, buildings, to be eternal, is it possible for non-material power like mind or spirit to be eternal? Now, this is an excellent question. So we know these things are not eternal. Now I'm asking you to consider something totally different. I'm asking you to consider, is it possible for there to be an energy that could be eternal? So the answer here would be yes, that is possible. Now, you've probably heard of the scientific laws called the laws of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics, energy can neither be created or destroyed. Did you realize that science itself teaches that it is possible for a non-material power like a mind or spirit and energy to be eternal? I mean, this is scientific law. If we called that power God, would it be possible that God could be eternal and also the builder of the universe? Well, the answer would have to be yes. Once again, we're just asking if this is possible, and we're basing our conclusions on our reasoning abilities from the evidence. Now, once again, let me point out a Bible passage that just confirms this principle. Now, you don't have to believe the Bible to understand that the principle being stated is accurate. Psalm 19, verse 1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. And so, once again, the Bible, through these principles, affirms the things that we've already drawn in conclusion. I think you're ready for the next section. Every design must have a designer. Now, wouldn't it be impossible for a camera to build itself? Have you ever seen a camera build itself? I certainly haven't. So the answer is yes. Now, can a camera appear from nothing? Now, I've gone shopping for cameras before. I've been looking for them. I know when I find a camera, it didn't just appear. Someone placed it there. So the answer obviously is no. Now, look at this question. Does the existence of a camera demand that it came from something? When you see a camera, you know someone built the camera. Now, I've seen a lot of cameras in my life, analog cameras, digital cameras. I know that every camera that I see was built by something. The existence of the camera, it demands it. So the answer is yes. The next question, wouldn't the creation of a camera require someone superior and exterior as a creator? Let's examine two of these words. The word superior means that something greater in ability and capability than the camera had to be responsible for its creation. The camera does not have the power to produce itself. By exterior, we're meaning that something outside of the camera has to be responsible for the creation of the camera. So the creation requires superior and exterior creator. The answer is yes. Does the camera demonstrate complex design? Well, a camera has lenses, has various parts. There's technology in that camera. And we realize that that complex design requires somebody to design it. Now, the next question says, wouldn't it be absurd to believe a camera could be created by an explosion in a parts factory? Let's just assume that a local parts factory, and it had all the parts a camera would need. There was an explosion. What would the odds be that all those pieces would fall together and form your Nikon or Canon camera? We all know that would be impossible and absurd. So this answer is obviously yes. An explosion would not make a camera. Let me ask another question. Is the human eye greater than the camera? Now, you know, your eye is a very important organ in your body. It allows you to focus, in fact, immediately. Have you ever noticed that you can look up at something in the distance and then look at something very close, and it's instantaneous how your eye focuses? Now, if you use a camera, you know it doesn't work like that. A camera takes time to adjust. Even the best cameras on the market take time, and even different lenses. You have to take a camera bag. You have wide-angle lenses, zoom lenses of all types. And so we understand the human eye far greater than the camera. We could put it like this. Would you trade a camera for your eye? I wouldn't. Look at the next question. If a camera requires a superior and exterior creator, would the human eye also require a superior and exterior creator? So if we were to believe that a camera must have a creator that's outside of itself, superior to itself, why wouldn't we believe the same thing about the human eye, which is much greater and more effective than the camera? Let's look at some summary questions to take everything we've learned so far and draw maybe even some conclusions. Does a design require a designer? Well, the answer is yes. Does the universe demonstrate characteristics of design? Well, when you look around the universe, it's obviously not chaos. There is design, so the answer is yes. Does the human body demonstrate characteristics of design? Once again, when I look at our bodies, it's undeniable. There is definitely design in your body. The answer is yes. Therefore, would it be reasonable to conclude that the universe must have a designer? Now, that's reasonable, and you would have to say yes. Have you noticed that we're coming to these conclusions based on evidence, sound reason, and logic? Look at what the psalmist said in the 139th Psalm in the 14th verse. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knoweth very well. Once again, the Bible acknowledges common sense principles. Let's go to the next section. If a national law required you to exterminate all blonde-haired people, would that law be moral or immoral? Now, I don't know what color your hair might be, but let's just suppose you had blonde hair, and I had blonde hair. If there was a law that was established that would require the killing of all blonde-haired people, would you consider that moral or immoral? I hope you would say immoral, because we understand as we look at just humanity itself, that would be wrong. Look at the next question. If the law of the majority required you to exterminate all blonde-haired people, would the law be moral or immoral? I'm not so certain that I would conclude because most people want blonde hair people killed that it would be moral. It really doesn't matter how many people thought that would be moral. We know that's immoral. And so when it comes to morality, we're not looking at counting heads and figures. There are obviously some things that are right and some things that are wrong, regardless of what the majority says. Let's look at our third question here. If international law required you to exterminate all blonde-haired people, would that law be moral or immoral? Well, once again, we go back to the very same premise. It really doesn't matter what international law says, because we know that the killing of all blonde-haired people just based upon their hair color would be an immoral thing to do. Well, let's look at this question. Is there a law that would protect all blonde-haired people from the majority national or international law? Now, this is a deeper question. In other words, what protects the blonde-haired people? Well, the answer is yes, there must be something out there that protects, that supersedes these standards. Well, what is it? It's a moral law. There is a moral law out there. For example, thou shalt not kill. It supersedes whatever national law is given, whatever the majority want. Those things are superseded by a moral law. We do not promote the killing based upon the color of a hair. Where does this moral law come from? Would you consider that the possibility may be God, that there's a higher power? Let's take this question and go a little bit further, because morals must have a moral lawgiver. You can't have morals if you don't have a moral lawgiver. So look at this question. Did moral law require the Nazis to disobey the German law to exterminate the Jews? This is one of the darker times in human history. This is during World War II. The Nazis, Germany. And we know from history that they required the killing of Jews. Now, the question said, did moral law require Nazis to disobey the German law to exterminate the Jews? Well, if you were a German, would you be obligated to disobey that law? The answer would be yes. Look at the next question. Does moral law require a moral law giver? Someone to create it? Well, the logical answer is yes. But then, well, who created it? Where is this law? Let's keep going. Wouldn't it be dangerous for moral law to come from one person like Adolf Hitler? Well, we know the results of something like this are catastrophic. We know that moral law is not written by one person. Wouldn't it be dangerous for moral law to come from a nation of people, maybe like the Nazis, Germany? Again, the answer would be yes. Look at the next question. Wouldn't it be dangerous for moral law to come from an international body, maybe like the United Nations? Once again, we're going to have to say yes. So we're observing that moral law doesn't come from an individual, doesn't come from a collective group of individuals. It doesn't come from a special body, a governing body. Now, when the Nazi leaders were convicted of violating moral law after the war and sentenced to death, I have a question. Did they violate German law? Now, I know this is a little bit deeper, but I think it's important as we're working our way through this study. I want you to note that the Nazis were following German law when they exterminated Jewish people. So when the Nazi leaders were convicted of violating moral law and sentenced to death, did they violate German law? No, they didn't. They were following German law. So they were actually doing what the law told them to do. Well, let's go to another question. When Nazi leaders were convicted of violating moral law and sentenced to death, did they violate international law? Now, no. During this time period, there was no international law. So as a matter of fact, we would have to say no. Now, when the Nazi leaders were convicted of violating moral law and sentenced to death, now this is a matter of fact, it's in our history books, did they violate U.S. law? Well, that doesn't make any sense. They were not U.S. citizens. The Nazis were Germans. They were German citizens subject to German law, not U.S. law. We cannot go to another country and prosecute someone who's a citizen and living in another country who commits a crime in another country under U.S. law. That's unfair. So let's go to the next question. By what law did the Nuremberg Trials convict the Nazis? Now, before we answer this question, I would like us to look at just a few historical notes. On July 27, 1946, Sir Hartley Shawcross, the chief prosecutor of the United Kingdom of Great Britain, asserted the basis for human behavior, quote, ultimately the rights of men, made as all men are made in the image of God, are fundamental, end quote. Let me give you another quote. In the Nuremberg Trials, where they were trying these Nazi officers, those in power, for the extermination of the Jews. 1946, Chief Justice Robert Jackson said, quote, as an international military tribunal, it rises above the provincial and the transient. Let me explain why I'm using these quotes. We're trying to establish how were the Nazis convicted. What law did they use? They couldn't use German law. They couldn't use U.S. law. They couldn't use the law of one person, a governing body. There was no international law. So when the Nazis were being accused, there had to be a basis for the conviction. So the courts had to find some basis where they could violate the law. The conclusion was that they violated the rights of man created by God. Chief Justice Robert Jackson used the words provincial and the transient, that there is a law that rises above the provinces of men. It's a greater law than the transient, that is, where we are. That law has to be the law of God. In summary, I would like to ask just a few questions. If God did not exist, would objective, universally accepted, unchanging moral values exist? If you erase a higher power that we've identified as God, then no, there would be no objective, accepted moral values. Do you believe objective moral values exist? Do you believe they exist today? Well, the answer has to be yes, that these are unchanging values that would prohibit, for example, the extermination of a race of people. Therefore, would you agree that God could exist? Once again, we're asking you to entertain the possibility, based upon sound reasoning, that this moral lawgiver is called God. I have another question for you to consider. Does evil exist? Well, all you need to do is turn on the news or even look around you, and you know there's evil. Here's another question. What is an example of evil? Well, based upon just the limited conversations we've had, I think we'd both agree that murder is an example of evil. So what standard of law or what standard would you use to define evil? How would you describe it? Where would you go? Well, for a person who believes in God, it's easy. It's the law of God. But if you do not believe in a higher being, you're going to have a very difficult time answering that question. Does the existence of good require the existence of evil? Well, so if there's light, there's dark, there's left, there's right. But if there's good, there's got to be evil. But what standard or law would you use to define goodness? Where would you go? We have shown that going to an international body, a governing body, a group of people, an individual is very dangerous, and it leads you to inconsistencies. But we have also shown that if you believe in a higher power that we're calling God, the answer is not difficult. So the standard we would use to show that it's wrong to murder even entire groups of people is the law of God. Now, once again, the Bible, it gives us that common sense principle. Mark chapter 10, verse 18. So Jesus said to him, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but one, and that is God." Let's go to our next section. Do animals show us God? I bet you've never considered this, but when you look at the animal kingdom, there's even more evidence of a supreme being. Let's begin with our first question. Is a tiger that escapes from a zoo and slays a helpless child taken to prison and given a trial? I've never seen this happen. Maybe in a cartoon, something that we know is not real, but in life, you don't take a tiger to jail. You don't assign it a defense attorney. It's not going to come before a judge. We know that's not realistic. So the answer is no. Next question. Is a human who murders a helpless child taken to prison and given a trial? Now that answer is yes. If a human does the same thing that the tiger did, the human is treated entirely different. Now, let's take that a little further. Do animals have morality? We all know they don't. The tiger does not live by a moral code, not the same code that humans live by. Do humans have morality? Now that answer is yes. We've already proven that. That's how the Nazis were convicted in the Nuremberg Trials. That's how convictions happen today. There's morality. Now, if humans have morality, and animals do not, from where does morality come? How do we get morality? Let's look at the next question. Does an animal have a conscience? Now, the answer there has to be no. An animal doesn't feel guilty after it slays its prey. Look at this question. Does a human have a conscience? Now, a human does feel guilty. So there's something within us. It pricks us. It makes us feel bad. That answer is yes. Does a lion feel remorse after it kills its prey? A lion doesn't feel remorse. But do most humans feel remorse after killing another human being? Well, that answer would be yes. Now, if a human has a conscience and an animal does not have a conscience, from where does the conscience come? How do you explain the conscience? Well, for those of us who believe in a supreme being, higher power, God, the answer is God. Now, if a conscience were the result of purely random chemical processes, in other words, it just kind of evolved, could we trust it? Could we have confidence in it? Could we rely upon it? Well, the answer would be no. But if a conscience were designed and created by a moral law giver, now could we trust it? Well, that answer would be yes. Did you know the Bible states this same principle? In Romans 1:20, for since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. The evidence for God is not always visible. Sometimes it's invisible. It's an invisible attribute. But it's interesting how the writer says it's clearly seen. You can clearly see the conscience in the human being, and you can clearly see that the animal does not have a conscience. Let's look at this next section. Pain and suffering is a blessing from God. Does pain serve as a warning device? When you place your hand on a hot stove, have you ever placed your hand on a hot stove? I can remember when I've done that. Maybe I didn't realize it was hot, or I just leaned over to brace myself. I placed my hand on the stove. Ouch, I'd remove it. The sensation of pain tells me that I need to remove my hand. It warns me. So the pain's a warning device. The answer is yes. Now, what would happen to your hand if you placed it on the hot stove and you could not feel pain? Now, you might be thinking at first, well, that would be wonderful because that hurts. But just think of what would happen if you placed your hand on that hot stove and you felt no pain, and then it began to singe your skin, kill your nerves. You could even lose your hand. So your hand would be burned. Now, the next question. When you place your hand on a hot stove, are you making a choice? Well, the answer obviously is yes. You have chosen to put your hand there. Now, you may not have wanted the pain that goes with it, but you did make a choice to put your hand there. So the answer is yes. Now, would your free will be removed if you were forced to keep your hand away from the hot stove? In other words, if someone took your hand and wouldn't let you put it there, would that remove your free will? And the answer would be yes. You see, we do have free will. We do make choices. Now, let's look at it just a little deeper. Is the law of gravity constant and dependable? The answer is yes. You know, we depend on gravity. We depend on gravity when we're weighing things, when we're creating objects that fly. We know that there are forces that we're trying to counteract. We understand those forces are constant. They're dependable. So look at the next question. What would happen if the law of gravity were random. What do you mean? In other words, for gravity to be in existence, it would not be dependable. It would just turn itself on and off. So we would have gravity now, but at any moment, gravity could cease and we'd just float. And you'd never know what would happen. So what would happen if gravity were random? Would there be chaos? What will happen if you choose to test the law of gravity by jumping off a cliff? Let's just suppose we were near a cliff and I said, you know what, I'm not so certain that gravity is real. So I'm going to make a leap. I'm going to jump. If I were to jump off a cliff to test the law of gravity, there would be death. Now, the next question. If you decide to test the law of gravity and suffer from a fall, who's to blame? If I make that choice, I'm to blame. I can't blame anybody else. I'm the one that decided to do it. Next question. If you benefit from the law of gravity, whom should you praise? Well, I would praise the one who made the gravity. Who made gravity? Well, the lawmaker made gravity. Who created the world? The higher power. Now, we're identifying that higher power as God in this study. Did you know that the Bible states this common sense principle? James 1, 2, and 3. My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. In this next section, I want us to look at punishment as a requirement for God. Does justice or righteousness demand that a judge punish convicted criminals? In other words, if a judge is just, does justice demand that convicted criminals be punished? Well, the answer is obviously yes. If a convicted criminal is set free with no penalty, would the judge be just? Well, the answer is obviously no. There would be an outcry. That's injustice. Now, does the punishment by a judge of a convicted criminal make the judge unloving? Because the judge punishes a convicted criminal, would you say that, well, that judge is mean or he doesn't love? Well, the obvious answer is no. Look at the next question. Can a judge be both just in his ruling and loving to all? Well, the answer has to be yes. A judge can make a just ruling and still be a loving judge. So if God is just, is he required to punish the guilty? Now, that's a deeper question. The same would be true from a judge as from God, who is the final judge. So the answer has to be yes. Now, if God did not punish those who are guilty, would he be just? Again, we're applying the same reasoning as we applied before. The answer would have to be no. Does the punishment of God of those who are guilty make God unloving? Again, we're comparing. Our answers must be consistent, so the answer has to be no. Can God be both just and loving to all? So the final answer is yes. He can be just in his ruling, punishing evildoers, because justice demands it. And he can also be loving towards everyone. Just like a father to his children, a judge in a civil or legal matter, and the judge of the world. Revelation 15:3 states this principle. They sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, great and marvelous are your ways, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the saints. As we conclude our study in this booklet, let's look at just a few facts. Number one, is it reasonable to believe if nothing existed in the beginning, that nothing would exist now? I suppose you would say that's reasonable. We've established that fact. All right, next. Is it reasonable to believe that the earth, with all of its complexities, came from nothing, or that it was created? Well, once again, we've established that it would be absurd to believe it came from nothing, so we would have to conclude it was created. Next question. Is it reasonable to believe that the human body, with all of its complexities, is an accident or that it was designed? So once again, we looked at the eye, but you know that's just one organ. Think of all the complex designs of the human body. The only reasonable conclusion is that it was created. Next question. Is it reasonable to believe morality can exist without a moral lawgiver? Now, we examined all different possibilities, and we even looked at true historical examples, and the answer had to be no. Is it reasonable to believe the existence of morality is due to the existence of a moral lawgiver? The only answer you can give is yes. If you give no as an answer, you're going to end up with very difficult conclusions and inconsistencies. Let's go to the next one. Is it reasonable to believe that pain is a warning device designed for our benefit? Well, the answer has to be yes. Remember the hot stove. So pain is actually good. It's required. Is it reasonable to believe that one can be just, that is righteous, and punish evildoers without being unloving? We looked at several examples, and the answer has to be yes. Next question. Is it reasonable to believe in the existence of a supreme eternal being? Now, look at the question carefully. I'm asking, is it reasonable? So what we've tried to do in this study is to demonstrate a belief in a higher power, a supreme being, is not just based on a feeling or something better felt than told. For in this entire study, we have provided common sense evidence, things that you can observe. In fact, anybody can observe it. It has not required that you have a higher education, doesn't require that you have a diploma or degree. I mean, these are just things you observe in life. And the very things we observe in life bring us to a conclusion that yes, it is reasonable to believe in the existence of a supreme being. Now, we've identified this supreme being as God. We're not asking you to believe in the God of the Bible at this point. We're just asking, is it reasonable to believe that there could be a supreme being? Now, in the next lesson, we can look at, is this supreme being the God of the Bible? Is there evidence for that? We're going to conclude this study at this point. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to having you in the next study of Believe the Bible.